I'm Sienna Parker, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm staring at a wedding dress hanging in my hotel room while my phone buzzes with another aggressive text from my fiancé demanding I fix my attitude before tonight's rehearsal dinner. The white satin feels like a prison uniform in my hands. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to marry Hunter Ellis, and honestly, the thought makes my stomach turn. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt trapped in your own life decisions. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. You're probably wondering how I got here, so let me back up. Growing up in Oregon, it was just me and my mom, Linda Parker. Dad died when I was 12, leaving us with what seemed like modest savings and a small insurance policy. Mom never complained, never acted desperate for money, just worked her quiet job at the local credit union and somehow managed to visit me in California every few months after I left for college. I always thought she was just getting by on Dad's pension and her savings. She'd show up wearing the same simple clothes, driving the same old Honda, staying in budget motels when she came to see me. Mom was practical like that, never one for flashy displays or unnecessary spending. She'd rather save money for my textbooks or help with rent than buy herself anything nice. What I didn't know was that my incredibly smart mother had been teaching herself about investments and real estate during those quiet evenings at home. While I was studying business administration in California, she was building an empire back in Oregon. But she kept it hidden, wanting me to learn independence and earn my own way in the world. After college, I landed a job at Wesley & Coder, a prestigious investment firm in Los Angeles. That's where I met Hunter Ellis, tall, confident, and absolutely magnetic when he wanted to be. He was a senior manager, known for his brilliant market strategies and his complete inability to treat anyone beneath his status with basic human decency. Most people at work either feared Hunter or secretly hated him. He'd humiliate assistants for minor mistakes, make cutting remarks about people's backgrounds, and generally act like he owned the world because his father was some big-shot real estate mogul. But for some reason, when Hunter tried his usual intimidation tactics on me, I'd just stare him down and deliver some pointed comeback that left him speechless. I think that's what attracted him to me initially. I was probably the first woman who didn't either worship him or cower in fear. Looking back, I realized Hunter wasn't interested in love. He was fascinated by the challenge of someone he couldn't immediately control or impress. Our relationship started well enough. Hunter could be charming when he wanted something, and I was young enough to mistake intensity for passion. But slowly, his true personality emerged. He'd snap at waitstaff, make cruel comments about my clothes or my small-town background, and expect me to laugh along with his mean-spirited jokes about coworkers. The weird thing was, despite dating for 2 years, I'd never met his parents. There was always some excuse. They were traveling, busy with business, dealing with family matters. I started wondering if maybe he was embarrassed of me, but Hunter would deflect any questions with promises that I'd meet them soon. When Hunter proposed, it felt sudden and almost desperate. We'd been arguing more frequently, and I was starting to question whether I wanted to spend my life with someone so casually cruel to others. But he showed up at my apartment with this enormous ring and this whole speech about how I made him want to be better, how we were perfect together. Against my better judgment, I said yes. Part of me hoped marriage might settle him down, make him more mature. Part of me was just tired of fighting and wanted to believe his promises. And honestly, part of me thought this might be as good as it gets. Successful, handsome guy from a wealthy family wants to marry me. How ungrateful would I be to walk away from that? Planning the wedding became a nightmare almost immediately. Hunter wanted everything expensive and showy, while I preferred something more intimate. Hunter had strong opinions about every detail, insisting on business associates and distant relatives I'd never heard of being added to the guest list. But the biggest red flag should have been Hunter's increasing criticism of my family. He'd make snide comments about my simple upbringing, joke about my mom's quaint lifestyle, and suggest that maybe she didn't need to be so prominently featured in the ceremony. When I pushed back, he'd claim he was just trying to help me elevate myself. 3 weeks before the wedding, during another argument about the seating arrangements, Hunter finally exploded. Look, Sienna, I'm trying to introduce you to a different level of society here. Your background is what it is, but you don't have to advertise it. The casual cruelty in his voice should have been my wake-up call, but I was already in too deep to see clearly. My mom arrived 2 days before the wedding, excited and nervous about meeting Hunter's family. She'd bought a beautiful blue dress for the occasion and brought a small gift for his parents, a hand-carved jewelry box from a local Oregon artisan. I remember thinking how thoughtful and nervous she seemed, wanting to make a good impression. I can't wait to meet the people who raised such a successful young man, she told me as we got ready in my hotel room. The hope in her voice still breaks my heart. If only I had known what was coming. I'm Sienna, still 28, and I'm about to tell you about the morning that changed everything. I woke up on my wedding day feeling like I was walking toward my execution rather than my happily ever after. The Santa Barbara hotel room was filled with flowers and champagne from Hunter's family, but something felt fundamentally wrong. Mom was already awake, sitting by the window in her blue dress, looking out at the ocean. "Beautiful morning for a wedding," she said softly, but I caught the worry in her voice. Mothers know when their daughters are making mistakes, even when they don't say anything. The morning beauty preparations felt surreal. Hairstylists, makeup artists, photographers capturing every moment of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I smiled for the camera while internally questioning every decision that had brought me here. The wedding dress cost more than most people's cars, but wearing it felt like playing dress-up in someone else's life. "You look stunning, darling," gushed Hunter's hired wedding coordinator, a woman who'd been managing every detail with military precision. "Mr. Ellis is going to be absolutely thrilled when he sees you." Hunter had insisted on not seeing me before the ceremony. Tradition, he called it, though I suspected it was more about maintaining the performance aspect of our relationship. Everything with Hunter was about appearances, about presenting the right image to the right people. The ceremony venue was breathtaking. Oceanfront terrace overlooking the Pacific, white roses everywhere, string quartet playing softly. Hunter's family had spared no expense, which should have felt romantic, but instead felt like I was being bought and paid for. Every detail screamed money and status, but nothing felt personal or meaningful. As guests began arriving, I watched from my bridal suite window. I recognized some of Hunter's colleagues from work, several people who looked like business associates, and many faces I'd never seen before. The guest list had somehow tripled from our original plans, filled with people Hunter deemed important for networking purposes. My side of the invitation list was pathetically small. A few college friends, my mom, and a couple of cousins. Hunter had managed to make me feel embarrassed about having fewer important people in my life, as if the quality of my relationships was measured by net worth and social status. When Hunter's groomsmen arrived, they looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog for entitled rich boys. They were loud, obviously drunk from the bachelor party the night before, making crude jokes that carried across the terrace. I watched their behavior and wondered if this was the kind of man I was really marrying. The wedding coordinator knocked on my door. "Time to get moving, Miss Parker. Your fiancé and his family are ready to begin." She handed me my bouquet, white roses and baby's breath, classic and expensive but completely generic. Nothing about this wedding reflected who I was or what I wanted. Mom squeezed my hand as we walked toward the elevator. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" It was the first time she directly questioned my decision, and her timing couldn't have been more perfect. But I was already in motion, already committed to this expensive production. "Just wedding nerves, Mom. Everyone gets them." Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't normal to feel this level of dread about marrying someone you supposedly loved. Normal brides might be nervous about the ceremony or the party, not questioning whether their fiancé was actually a decent human being. The elevator ride down felt endless. Hotel staff smiled and congratulated us. Other guests complimented my dress. Photographers captured every moment. But inside, I felt like I was sleepwalking toward a cliff, unable to stop myself from taking the final step. When the elevator doors opened to reveal the ceremony space, my breath caught. It really was beautiful. Perhaps the most elegant wedding I'd ever seen. For a brief moment, I let myself imagine this was what I actually wanted, that Hunter was the man I thought I was marrying when I said yes. Then I spotted Hunter at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in his custom tuxedo, and felt that familiar flutter of attraction mixed with unease. He was charming and successful and wanted to marry me. So why did I feel like I was making the biggest mistake of my life? The wedding coordinator positioned us for the processional. "Mrs. Parker, you'll walk first, then we'll have our beautiful bride make her entrance." Mom kissed my cheek and started down the aisle, looking elegant and proud despite her simple dress and humble background. I watched her walk toward the altar where Hunter waited with his groomsmen. From this distance, I couldn't see his expression, but I knew he'd be wearing that confident smile he used for public occasions. The smile that looked perfect in photographs but never quite reached his eyes. The string quartet began playing the wedding march, and everyone stood. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for months. The moment that was supposed to be magical and perfect, and everything I'd ever dreamed of. Instead, I felt like I was walking toward my own funeral. But what happened next would make everything else seem irrelevant. I'm Sienna, 28, and I'm about to tell you about the moment I met my future in-laws for the first time. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. Actually, it went so badly that I'm still amazed I didn't immediately grab my mother and run screaming from that hotel. Mom was already seated in the front row, looking nervous but hopeful. She'd smoothed her blue dress at least 6 times and kept touching the small pearl necklace she'd worn to every important family event since I was a child. She looked beautiful and dignified, exactly like the woman who'd raised me with love and sacrifice. Hunter stood at the altar looking confident and relaxed, chatting with his groomsmen while guests continued filing into their seats. I was waiting in the bridal staging area, bouquet in hand, when the wedding coordinator approached looking slightly flustered. "Miss Parker, there's been a small delay. Mr. Ellis's parents have just arrived and would like to meet you briefly before the ceremony begins." She gestured toward a distinguished older couple approaching from the hotel lobby. Victoria and Richard Ellis looked exactly like what you'd imagine wealthy real estate moguls would look like. Perfectly styled, expensively dressed, and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Victoria's silver hair was styled in an elegant updo. Her navy blue suit probably cost more than I made in a month, and her jewelry was understated but clearly expensive. Richard looked like an older version of Hunter. Tall, handsome, with the same piercing blue eyes and confident bearing. His suit was impeccably tailored, his silver watch caught the light as he extended his hand, and his smile seemed genuine enough. "You must be Sienna," Victoria said warmly, air-kissing near my cheeks in that practiced way wealthy women have perfected. "You look absolutely stunning, darling. Hunter has told us so much about you." I doubted that, considering Hunter had managed to avoid this introduction for 2 years, but I smiled and thanked them. "I'm so excited to finally meet you both. Hunter speaks of you often." "We're delighted to welcome you to the family," Richard added, his voice warm and sincere. For a brief moment, I relaxed. Maybe all my worrying had been for nothing. Maybe Hunter had simply been busy, and his parents were actually lovely people. "We should probably take our seats," Victoria continued, glancing around the elegant ceremony space. "Everything looks absolutely magnificent. You've done a beautiful job with the planning." I started to explain that Hunter's family had actually handled most of the arrangements, but Victoria's attention had already shifted. Her gaze moved past me toward the front row where my mother sat waiting patiently, hands folded in her lap, looking exactly like what she was. A kind, humble woman who'd worked hard all her life to provide for her daughter. Victoria's expression changed so subtly that if I hadn't been watching closely, I might have missed it. The warm smile faltered for just a second, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion, then quickly shifted to what I could only describe as barely concealed distaste. "Richard," she murmured quietly. "Who is that woman in the front row?" Richard followed her gaze and his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Must be one of the hotel staff, probably waiting for instructions about the reception setup." My stomach dropped. They were looking directly at my mother, the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give me the best life possible, who'd driven 12 hours to be here, who was wearing her best dress and proudest smile, and they assumed she was hired help. "Actually," I said, my voice sounding strangled, "that's my mother, Linda Parker." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Victoria's mouth formed a small O of surprise, while Richard's expression shifted from confusion to poorly concealed disappointment. They both looked back at my mother, then at me, as if trying to reconcile what they were seeing with whatever expectations they'd formed. "Oh," Victoria said finally, her voice notably cooler than it had been moments before. "How lovely." Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We should probably take our seats before the ceremony begins. Don't want to hold things up." They moved toward the front row, leaving me standing there feeling like I'd just failed some test I didn't know I was taking. I watched them settle into their seats, Richard nodding politely to my mother, Victoria offering a tight smile that looked more like a grimace. The wedding coordinator touched my arm gently. "Everything all right, Miss Parker? You look a bit pale." I wanted to say that everything was absolutely not all right, that I'd just watched my future in-laws judge my mother based on her appearance and find her wanting. But guests were watching, photographers were positioned, and the string quartet was ready to begin the processional. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just nervous." But as I prepared to walk down that aisle toward Hunter, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just gotten a glimpse of what my future held. If his parents could dismiss my mother so casually, what did they really think of me? What had Hunter told them about my background, my family, my life before him? The music began, and I knew there was no turning back now. Or so I thought. I'm Sienna, 28. And what I'm about to tell you happened in front of 50 wedding guests, 2 photographers, and a videographer who captured every humiliating second. My mother-in-law called my mom a cleaning lady at my own wedding. My fiancé laughed and agreed. I stood there in my white dress, bouquet in hand, and felt my world completely collapse. The ceremony had gone smoothly enough. Hunter and I exchanged vows that felt hollow and rehearsed, rings that felt like shackles, and kisses that photographers insisted on capturing from multiple angles. I'd managed to smile through it all while that uncomfortable feeling from meeting his parents continued churning in my stomach. During the cocktail hour, I noticed Victoria and Richard keeping their distance from my mother. They socialized with their wealthy friends, posed for photos with Hunter, and made polite small talk with other guests, but they consistently avoided the area where Mom was sitting. Mom, bless her heart, seemed completely unaware of the snub. She was chatting with my college roommate Sarah and a few other guests, looking genuinely happy despite being surrounded by people who clearly had more money than she'd ever seen. Her joy at my wedding was so pure and genuine that it made what happened next even more heartbreaking. The reception began with the usual traditions. First dance. Father-daughter dance that made me tearful since Dad wasn't there to dance with me. Toasts from the wedding party. Hunter's best man made a speech about how lucky Hunter was to find someone who'd keep him grounded, which felt more like an insult than a compliment. I was talking with some of Hunter's college friends when I heard Victoria's voice behind me. Clear and caring in that way voices do when people are trying to be heard, but not necessarily by everyone. Richard, who invited the cleaning lady to sit at the family table, the words hit me like ice water. I turned around to see Victoria pointing discreetly toward my mother, who was sitting exactly where the wedding coordinator had placed her, at the head table, right where the mother of the bride belonged. That's the bride's mother, someone corrected quietly. I couldn't see who. Victoria's laugh was sharp and dismissive. That woman? Are you serious? She looks like she wandered in from the hotel housekeeping staff. My mother was wearing her best dress, a simple blue sheath that was elegant and appropriate. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup was perfect, and she looked exactly like what she was, a dignified woman celebrating her daughter's wedding day. But apparently, none of that mattered to Victoria Ellis. Well, Richard chimed in, his voice carrying that particular brand of cruelty that only comes from generations of inherited wealth. I suppose we can't all have standards. At least the girl turned out presentable. Several guests had stopped their conversations and were now listening with poorly concealed horror. I felt my face burn with shame and rage, but I was frozen in place, unable to process what was actually happening. Then Hunter appeared at his parents' side, fresh from a conversation with some business associates. He must have caught the tail end of their comments because he looked over at my mother, then back at his parents with a knowing smirk. "Don't worry about it," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "The mother-in-law is definitely low class, but at least Sienna makes up for it. I mean, the family genes had to improve somewhere, right?" The group burst into laughter. Victoria's delighted giggle, Richard's hearty chuckle, and Hunter's confident laugh that I'd heard 1,000 times but never directed at me or my family. The sound cut through me like glass. I stood there in my expensive wedding dress, surrounded by flowers and candlelight and everything that was supposed to be perfect, while my new husband and his family mocked the woman who'd sacrificed everything for me. The woman who'd worked double shifts to pay for my college applications, who'd driven hundreds of miles to move me into my dorm room, who'd believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. My mother was still sitting at her table, completely unaware that she was being discussed like some embarrassing family secret. She was smiling at something Sarah had said, her face glowing with happiness at seeing me married. She had no idea that her simple presence was being treated as a source of shame. The rage that flooded through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just anger. It was a fundamental shift in how I saw everything around me. These people, including the man I'd just married, were not just classist snobs. They were cruel. They were the kind of people who found joy in making others feel small. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through their laughter like a blade. The conversation stopped immediately. Hunter turned toward me with that confident smile still on his face, clearly expecting me to join in their amusement or at least ignore what I'd heard. "Did I just hear you call my mother low class?" I asked, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Hunter's smile faltered slightly. "Sienna, we were just... Did you call my mother low class?" I repeated, each word deliberate and clear. Victoria stepped forward, apparently deciding to take control of the situation. "Darling, we were simply making an observation about different social backgrounds." Nothing personal, of course. Nothing personal. As if insulting the woman who raised me was just casual conversation. I looked at Hunter, waiting for him to defend my mother, to show some sign that he understood how wrong this was. Instead, he stood there looking uncomfortable but not ashamed, clearly wishing I'd just let it go and not make a scene. That's when I knew my marriage was over before it had even begun. I'm Sienna, 28, and I just canceled my own wedding reception in front of 50 shocked guests. The silence that followed my announcement was so complete, you could hear the ocean waves through the open terrace doors. Hunter's face went through about 6 different emotions in 3 seconds, settling on something between panic and rage. "Sienna, you're being dramatic," Hunter said, his voice tight with forced calm. "Let's discuss this privately." "No," I said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. "We're going to discuss this right here, right now, in front of everyone who just heard your parents insult my mother and heard you agree with them." Victoria stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Young lady, I think you're overreacting to a simple misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I turned to face her directly. "You called my mother cleaning lady. Your son called her low class. You all laughed about it. What exactly did I misunderstand?" The guests around us had stopped pretending not to listen. Several people had their phones out, which in hindsight was probably the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes you need witnesses to protect yourself from people who'll later claim things never happened. Richard tried a different approach, using the patronizing voice successful men reserve for women they consider hysterical. "Sienna, emotions run high on wedding days. Why don't we all take a breath and—" "My mother," I interrupted, my voice growing stronger with each word, "worked 2 jobs to put me through college. She sacrificed her own dreams so I could have mine. She drove 12 hours to be here today because she was excited to welcome your son into our family. And you repaid that kindness by mocking her appearance and treating her like she's beneath you." I looked directly at Hunter. "And you, the man I just married, thought that was funny." Hunter's jaw clenched. "Sienna, you're embarrassing us both. Can we please handle this like adults?" "Adults?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Adults don't mock their mother-in-law at their own wedding. Adults don't judge people by their clothing or their bank accounts. Adults show basic human decency to the people who raised the person they claim to love." More guests were gathering now, drawn by the escalating voices. I could see my mother across the room, finally realizing something was wrong. Her face showed confusion and worry as she started walking toward us. "You know what the really sad part is?" I continued, addressing Hunter but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I actually convinced myself that you were a good person underneath all the arrogance. I made excuses for your behavior, told myself you were just stressed or ambitious or misunderstood. But good people don't treat others the way you treat people." Hunter grabbed my arm, not gently. "Sienna, stop. You're making a scene." I pulled away from his grip. "I'm making a scene? I'm not the one who spent the cocktail hour insulting the mother of the bride. I'm not the one who just showed 50 people exactly what kind of family they really are. What's happening?" My mother's soft voice cut through the tension as she reached our group. The concern in her eyes was heartbreaking. She still didn't know what had triggered this confrontation. I looked at her kind, worried face and felt my resolve strengthen even more. This woman had given me everything. She deserved so much better than to be treated like an embarrassment by people who weren't worthy to shine her shoes. "Mom," I said gently, "Hunter's parents just spent the last 10 minutes making jokes about your appearance and social status. They called you a cleaning lady and suggested you don't belong at the family table." My mother's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, hurt, disappointment, and finally a kind of sad resignation that broke my heart. She'd dealt with classist behavior before, but never at her own daughter's wedding. "I see," she said quietly, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. "And Hunter," I continued, my voice getting harder, "thought their comments were hilarious. He agreed that you're low class, but said at least I make up for it." Mom looked at Hunter with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, but a deep, profound disappointment that was somehow worse than rage. Victoria apparently decided this was her moment to regain control. "Linda, I'm sure you understand that different families have different standards. Nothing personal, of course." My mother studied Victoria for a long moment, then smiled. It wasn't a warm smile or a bitter smile. It was the smile of someone who knows exactly who they're dealing with and isn't impressed. "Mrs. Ellis," Mom said in her calm, measured voice, "I need to tell you something. What happened next changed everything. I'm Sienna, 28, and what my mother said next made Victoria Ellis's face go so white, I thought she might actually faint right there on the terrace. Hunter's mouth fell open like a cartoon character, and Richard started choking on his champagne. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor that's absolutely perfect. "You see, Mrs. Ellis?" my mother continued in that same calm, dignified voice. "I may not look like much to you, but appearances can be deceiving." She smoothed her simple blue dress with one hand while maintaining perfect eye contact with Victoria. "I'm actually quite wealthy." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the string quartet in the background, the distant sound of waves, even the faint clink of champagne glasses from other parts of the reception. But nobody in our immediate circle made a sound. "I'm sorry, what?" Richard managed to croak out, still looking like he was having trouble breathing. Mom smiled that same serene smile. "After my husband died, I took the insurance money and his savings, which was about $2.8 million, and I educated myself about investments. Real estate, technology startups, market futures. Turns out I have quite a talent for it." Victoria's champagne glass was trembling in her hand. Hunter looked like someone had just told him gravity was optional. "Over the past 16 years, Mom continued conversationally, I've built a portfolio worth approximately $1.2 billion. I own commercial real estate in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. I'm a silent partner in 6 tech companies, 3 of which have gone public. And I have investment properties in Oregon wine country that generate more passive income than most people make in a year." Richard's face had gone from red to purple. 1.2 billion? Give or take a few $100 million, Mom said with a slight shrug. "The markets fluctuate, you understand?" I was staring at my mother like I'd never seen her before. $1.2 billion? The woman who'd visited me in my cramped college apartment, who'd helped me move furniture in a rental truck, who'd always been so careful about money, was worth over $1 billion? "But your house, your car," I stammered. Mom looked at me with such love and tenderness that I felt tears starting to form. "Sweetheart, I wanted you to earn your own way. I wanted you to build your own character and work ethic without depending on family money. Some of the most miserable people I know are trust fund children who never learned their own worth." She paused, then looked directly into my eyes and said gently, "Fila, su billionaria." She turned back to Victoria, who still looked like she was processing a difficult math problem. "I live modestly because I choose to, not because I have to. I drive an older car because it's reliable and paid for. I dress simply because expensive clothes don't make the person wearing them better or more valuable." Hunter finally found his voice. "Linda, we had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Mom said smoothly, "because you never bothered to get to know me. You took one look at my appearance and decided I wasn't worth your time or respect. You made assumptions based on my clothing and my manner of speaking, and you treated me accordingly." Victoria was opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she recalculated everything she'd said in the past hour. "Mrs. Parker?" Victoria began, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "Oh, there's been no misunderstanding," Mom interrupted gently. "You showed me exactly who you are. You showed everyone here exactly what kind of people you are. Wealth doesn't change that, Mrs. Ellis. It just makes your behavior more embarrassing for you." The crowd around us had grown larger, and several people were no longer pretending not to listen. I caught sight of phones being held up, probably recording this entire conversation. In the social media age, moments like this don't stay private. Hunter stepped forward desperately. "Linda, obviously there's been a huge mistake. If we'd known about your success, things would have been completely different." And there it was. The confession that revealed everything. If they'd known about her money, they would have treated her differently, which meant their respect wasn't based on her character, her kindness, or her intelligence. It was purely transactional, based on net worth. "You're absolutely right, Hunter," Mom said with devastating clarity. "If you'd known about my money, you would have treated me completely differently. You would have been polite and respectful and probably even friendly, which just proves that you're exactly the kind of people I thought you were." I looked at my new husband, this man I'd just promised to love and honor, and saw him for what he really was. Not just classist, but fundamentally hollow. A person whose values shifted based on someone's bank account balance. "The marriage is over," I said quietly. Hunter whipped around to face me. "Sienna, don't be ridiculous. We can work this out." "Work what out?" I asked. "The fact that you and your family just spent my wedding reception humiliating my mother? The fact that you're only backtracking now because you found out she's wealthy? The fact that you laughed when your mother called her a cleaning lady? We can get past this," Hunter said desperately. "All marriages have bumps in the road." I looked around at the beautiful reception. the flowers, the champagne, the elegant terrace overlooking the Pacific. Then I looked at my mother, standing there with such quiet dignity despite everything that had happened. "No," I said clearly. "We really can't." And with that, I took my mother's arm and walked away from the most expensive mistake I'd ever almost made. I'm Sienna, 28, and 3 days after walking out of my own wedding reception, I'm sitting in my mother's rental car, staring at the most beautiful mansion I've ever seen. The GPS says we're at the right address, but this can't possibly be where my mom lives. This looks like something out of Architectural Digest, not the modest house I grew up visiting. What do you think will happen next? Let me know in the comments below. "Mom," I said slowly, "I think your driver made a mistake." She smiled from the passenger seat, that same gentle smile I'd known my whole life, but now it carried secrets I was just beginning to understand. "No mistake, sweetheart. This is home." The iron gates opened automatically as we approached, revealing a winding driveway bordered by perfectly manicured gardens. The house, no, mansion, was a stunning blend of modern architecture and natural materials, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering glimpses of elegant interiors. A fountain centered the circular driveway, and I could see what looked like a 3-car garage off to the side. "Mom, this is insane," I breathed as we pulled up to the front entrance. "You've been living here this whole time?" "For the past 8 years," she confirmed, gathering her purse. "I bought it after my portfolio really started taking off. The previous owners were tech entrepreneurs who lost everything in a market crash. I got it for about 60% of what they'd paid." A uniformed man appeared at our car. Not a butler exactly, but clearly some kind of household staff. He greeted my mother warmly and took our bags without being asked. The casual way Mom interacted with him suggested this was completely normal, not some elaborate show for my benefit. The interior of the house was even more stunning than the exterior. Soaring ceilings, original artwork, a kitchen that belonged in a cooking magazine, and a living room with a view of the Columbia River that took my breath away. Everything was elegant but comfortable. Expensive, but not ostentatious. "I know it's a lot to take in," Mom said, watching my expression as I tried to process what I was seeing. "I've wanted to tell you for years, but I was afraid it would change how you saw yourself and your achievements." I sank into a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly salary. $1.2 billion, Mom. How is that even possible?" She settled across from me, still wearing that simple blue dress from the wedding, looking completely at ease in her multi-million-dollar home. "Your father left us with about $2.8 million in insurance and savings. It was a good amount to start with if you were smart about it. But you never seemed interested in money or investing." "I became very interested in it after he died," Mom said quietly. "I realized that financial security was the only way to protect you and myself from depending on anyone else. So I studied. I read every investment book I could find, took online courses, started small with index funds and mutual funds." She stood up and walked to a bookshelf lined with financial texts, investment guides, and business biographies. "I made my first real estate investment 5 years after your father died, a small duplex in Portland that I renovated and rented out. The profit from that went into my next investment, then the next." "But you always seemed so normal, so careful with money," Mom laughed. "Careful is how you build wealth, sweetheart. Flashy spending is how you lose it. I wanted you to see the value of work, of earning your own way, of not depending on family money for your identity or self-worth." I thought about all the times she'd visited me in California, staying in budget hotels, driving that old Honda, wearing the same clothes year after year. Meanwhile, she was sitting on a fortune that could have bought anything she wanted. "You could have told me," I said softly. "I wouldn't have changed." "Maybe not," Mom agreed. "But I've seen what inherited wealth does to some people. It makes them lazy, entitled, disconnected from reality. Look at Hunter's family. They inherited their money and used it as a weapon to make others feel small." The comparison stung because it was accurate. Victoria and Richard Ellis wielded their wealth like a club, using it to establish superiority over people they deemed inferior. Even Hunter, for all his professional success, had been shaped by growing up in a family where money was treated as a measure of human worth. "So what happens now?" I asked. Mom smiled. "Now you decide what you want to do with your life. You can go back to Los Angeles, continue working at Wesley & Co., and pretend none of this happened. Or you can stay here for a while, figure out what you actually want instead of what you think you're supposed to want." Before I could answer, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Hunter," she said, showing me the display. "Don't answer it," I said quickly. "Actually," Mom said with a mischievous glint in her eye, "I think I will. She answered the call on speaker. "Hello, Hunter." "Linda, thank God." Hunter's voice filled the room, sounding desperate and slightly panicked. "Is Sienna with you? She's not answering my calls." "She's here," Mom confirmed, winking at me. "We're having a lovely visit. Linda, I need you to know how sorry we are about what happened at the wedding. My parents feel terrible about the misunderstanding, and we'd love the chance to make it right." The sudden change in his tone was almost comical. 3 days ago, he'd been laughing at jokes about my mother being a cleaning lady. Now he was practically groveling. "What kind of making it right did you have in mind?" Mom asked innocently. "We'd like to invite you both to dinner next week, at our country club. My parents want to formally apologize and welcome you to the family properly." I gestured frantically for Mom to decline, but she was clearly enjoying herself. "That's very thoughtful, Hunter," she said. "But I'm curious. What exactly changed your mind about having me in the family?" The silence on the other end was telling. Finally, Hunter said, "We realized we misjudged you. We should have gotten to know you better before forming any opinions. And my financial situation had nothing to do with this change of heart?" Another pause. "Of course not. Money doesn't matter to us." Mom and I looked at each other, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. The man whose family had just spent my wedding reception mocking my mother's appearance was now claiming money didn't matter to them. "Well," Mom said sweetly, "I appreciate the invitation, but I think Sienna and I need some time to process everything that's happened." Of course. Take all the time you need. But Linda, please know that we consider you family now, and we want to support you and Sienna in any way we can." After she hung up, Mom shook her head in disgust. "That boy has no shame whatsoever." "None," I agreed. "But Mom, you realize they're going to keep calling, right? They're not going to just give up now that they know about the money." Mom's smile turned slightly predatory. "Let them call. I have a feeling this is going to be very entertaining." I'm Sienna, 28, and over the next week, Hunter called 17 times, sent 42 text messages, and had flowers delivered to my mother's mansion twice daily. The man who couldn't be bothered to defend me at our own wedding was suddenly the most attentive husband in history. Too bad for him that ship had sailed, sunk, and been eaten by sharks. The text messages were particularly amusing. They ranged from desperate apologies to business propositions to what appeared to be love letters written by someone who'd never actually experienced love. My personal favorite was, "Sienna, I've realized that you're the missing piece of my soul. Without you, I'm just a hollow shell of success and ambition." "A hollow shell of success and ambition," I read aloud to my mother over breakfast on her gorgeous terrace overlooking the Columbia River. He actually wrote that, with a straight face apparently. Mom nearly choked on her coffee. He's really committed to this act, isn't he? The flowers were even more ridiculous. Enormous arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, each accompanied by increasingly dramatic cards. "For the woman who makes my world complete. Until you return to me, I am lost. Our love is stronger than any misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I muttered, tossing the latest card into the growing pile. "He calls his family humiliating you at our wedding a misunderstanding." But the calls were the best part. Hunter had apparently decided that persistence was the key to winning me back. Each conversation followed the same pattern: desperate apologies, promises to change, assurances that his family now understood their mistake, and increasingly transparent hints about my mother's wealth. "Sienna, I've been thinking about our future," he said during his latest call. "With your mother's business acumen and our combined professional network, we could build something incredible together." I put the call on speaker so Mom could hear. "What kind of something?" "Investment partnerships, real estate ventures, maybe even start our own firm. Linda's obviously brilliant with money, and I have connections throughout the industry. We could be a real power couple." Mom rolled her eyes so hard I was surprised they didn't fall out of her head. "Hunter," I said sweetly, "are you suggesting that you want to get back together with me because of my mother's money?" "Of course not," he said quickly. "I love you, Sienna. I've always loved you. The money is just a bonus. A bonus. My mother's $1.2 billion was just a bonus to our great love story. I need to think about it," I told him, which wasn't true but bought me time to figure out how to end this charade permanently. After hanging up, Mom looked at me seriously. "You know he's not going to give up easily, right? Men like Hunter don't accept rejection well, especially when there's money involved." She was right. Over the next few days, Hunter's campaign intensified. He sent gourmet food deliveries, jewelry, even a car. A red BMW convertible that arrived with a note saying, "For my beautiful wife, who deserves only the best." That's when I realized I needed to go back to Los Angeles and end this properly. Hunter clearly thought he could win me back through persistence and expensive gifts. He needed to understand that our marriage was over, not just postponed. I need to go back to work, I told Mom over dinner that night. I need to clean out my desk and submit my resignation formally. And see Hunter, she added knowingly. And see Hunter, I confirmed. This fantasy he's living in where we reconcile and become some kind of investment power couple needs to end. Mom nodded thoughtfully. You know, sweetheart, there's something I haven't told you yet. More revelations about your secret wealth? I asked jokingly. Not about my wealth, she said with a smile that made me nervous. About yours. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. My what now? Sienna, you're my only child and my only heir. Everything I've built will be yours someday. But more than that, I've already set up a trust fund in your name. It's been generating income for the past 5 years. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that you currently have access to approximately $18 million. I was going to tell you on your 30th birthday, but recent events have changed my timeline. $18 million. I was sitting on $18 million and didn't even know it. The account information is in the safe in my study. Mom continued calmly, as if she hadn't just changed my entire life with one sentence. I suggest you access those funds before you return to Los Angeles. You're going to need them. Need them for what? Mom's smile turned slightly mysterious. For what comes next, sweetheart? Hunter thinks he's dealing with the same woman he married, someone who depends on her job, who needs his family's approval, who can be intimidated by wealth and status. He has no idea what's coming. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, which in Mom's new house was larger than my entire apartment in Los Angeles, and tried to process everything that had happened. A week ago, I'd been an investment analyst engaged to a man I thought I loved. Now I was a multi-millionaire heiress who'd walked out on her own wedding after watching her husband mock her mother. The money was overwhelming to think about, but what struck me more was the realization that I was finally, truly free. Free from Hunter's manipulation, from his family's judgment, from the need to prove myself worthy of their acceptance. I could do anything I wanted, be anyone I wanted to be. And what I wanted to be, I realized, was someone who made Hunter Ellis regret every cruel word he'd ever spoken. My mother was right. He had no idea what was coming. I'm Sienna, 28, and I just walked into the Wesley & Cobber's offices in Los Angeles wearing a designer suit that cost more than I used to make in a month. My colleagues did double takes, Hunter's assistant nearly dropped her coffee, and I felt like I was seeing everything with new eyes. Amazing how a little financial security can change your entire perspective on corporate politics. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using money I'd inherited to make a statement about not needing money for validation. But sometimes you have to play the game with the rules you're given, and in Hunter's world, appearance was everything. I'd spent the previous week in Portland working with my mother's financial advisor to access my trust fund and understand my new reality. $18 million was more money than I'd ever imagined having, but it was also the key to a freedom I'd never experienced. Freedom from needing this job, from needing Hunter's approval, from needing anyone's acceptance. My desk looked exactly as I'd left it 2 weeks earlier. Neat stacks of market analyses, client reports, and the half-finished project I'd been working on before the wedding. It felt like looking at artifacts from someone else's life. Sienna! My colleague Jennifer rushed over, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. How was the honeymoon? We heard there was some kind of situation at the wedding? Of course they'd heard. Hunter's public humiliation was probably the most entertaining thing that had happened at Wesley & Co. in years. In an office full of investment analysts, gossip traveled faster than stock tips. The wedding was educational, I said with a smile that Jennifer couldn't quite interpret. Very educational. Before she could ask follow-up questions, I spotted Hunter emerging from the elevator with his usual entourage of junior analysts and assistants. He was mid-sentence about some client presentation when he saw me, and his entire demeanor changed. The confident corporate prince became a nervous husband hoping for reconciliation. Sienna, he said, approaching my desk with that careful smile he used when he wasn't sure of his reception. You're back. Temporarily, I confirmed, continuing to pack my personal items into a box. I'm here to resign. The color drained from Hunter's face. Resign? Sienna, don't be hasty. I know we need to talk, but there's no reason to make career decisions based on personal issues. Personal issues. He was still minimizing what had happened, still treating his family's cruelty as some minor disagreement we could work through. Actually, I said, straightening up to face him directly, My career decisions are based on professional considerations. I've decided to pursue other opportunities. What other opportunities? Hunter's voice carried a hint of desperation. Sienna, you have a great position here. You're respected, you're successful. Don't throw that away because you're angry with me. The assumption that my entire professional worth was tied to this job, to his approval, to his recommendation, was so typical of Hunter that I almost laughed. He genuinely couldn't conceive of a world where I didn't need him or his family's connections to succeed. I'm starting my own consulting firm, I said calmly. I already have several clients lined up. This was true. My mother's financial advisor had connected me with 3 companies looking for independent investment analysis, and my portfolio from Wesley & Co. had impressed them enough to offer me contracts. Amazing how much more confident clients became when they learned you had significant personal wealth invested in the markets. Hunter's jaw tightened. Sienna, we need to discuss this privately. Your office now. Actually, I don't work here anymore, so I don't have an office, and I don't take orders from you anymore either. I closed my box of personal items and tucked it under my arm. I'm done here. I started walking toward the elevator, but Hunter followed, his voice growing louder and more agitated. Sienna, you're making a huge mistake. You can't just walk away from everything we built together. Everything we built? I turned back to face him. Hunter, you mean everything you allowed me to achieve while making sure I knew it was only possible because of your recommendation and your family's connections? We were attracting attention now. Other employees were slowing their pace, pretending to review documents while obviously listening to our conversation. In an office environment where advancement often depended on perception and relationships, public arguments were rare entertainment. That's not fair, Hunter said, his voice tight with frustration. I've always supported your career. You've tolerated my career as long as it didn't threaten your ego or your status. I corrected. There's a difference. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and I stepped inside. Hunter moved to follow me, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said firmly. We're done. Hunter, the marriage is over. I'm leaving the company, and I don't want any further contact with you or your family. As the doors started to close, Hunter called out desperately. Sienna, wait. What about your mother? What about the opportunities we discussed? The doors closed on his panicked face, but his words echoed in the small space. Even now, even as I was walking away, he was still thinking about my mother's money and the opportunities it represented for him. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in the parking garage when my phone rang. Hunter, of course. Sienna, please don't leave like this. We need to talk. We just talked, I said calmly. You made it clear that you see my mother's wealth as a business opportunity. I made it clear that I'm not interested in being your path to her money. That's not... I love you, Sienna. Money has nothing to do with it. If money has nothing to do with it, I said, then it shouldn't matter that I'm financially independent now. It shouldn't change anything about our relationship. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Goodbye, Hunter, I said, and hung up. But as I drove away from Wesley & Co. for the last time, I knew this wasn't really goodbye. Men like Hunter didn't accept rejection gracefully, especially when there was money involved. He'd try again, probably more dramatically next time. I was right. What he did next was so spectacularly embarrassing that it became legendary at Wesley & Co. for years afterward. I'm Sienna, 28, and I just received the most ridiculous phone call of my life. Hunter's assistant called to invite me to a special company presentation at Wesley & Co.'s tomorrow morning. When I asked what kind of presentation, she giggled nervously and said it was a surprise. Given that Hunter has been calling me 17 times a day for 2 weeks, I'm pretty sure I know exactly what kind of surprise this is going to be. Against my better judgment and my mother's advice to let sleeping dogs lie, I decided to attend. Partly out of curiosity, partly out of a perverse desire to see just how far Hunter would go to humiliate himself, and partly because I had a feeling this would be the perfect opportunity to end things permanently. I arrived at Wesley & Co. the next morning wearing my most expensive suit, a sleek black Armani that had cost me $3,000 but made me feel invincible. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me, confirming that my appearance was causing exactly the reaction I'd intended. Miss Parker, she said breathlessly, Mr. Ellis is waiting for you in conference room A. The whole company is gathering for the presentation. The whole company. Whatever Hunter had planned, he decided to make it a public spectacle. This was either going to be the most romantic gesture in corporate history or the most embarrassing professional suicide I'd ever witnessed. Conference room A was Wesley & Co.'s largest meeting space, normally reserved for client presentations and company-wide meetings. As I entered, I saw that every seat was filled. Analysts, assistants, managers, even some of the senior partners I recognized from company events. Everyone was looking expectant and slightly uncomfortable, like they'd been told to attend something they weren't sure they wanted to see. Hunter stood at the front of the room next to a projection screen, wearing his best suit and a nervous smile. When he saw me enter, his face lit up with relief and anticipation. He gestured to an empty chair in the front row that had clearly been reserved for me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hunter began once I was seated, "thank you all for attending this special presentation. As you know, I recently married my wonderful colleague, Sienna Parker." A few people clapped politely. Most looked like they wished they were anywhere else. "Unfortunately," Hunter continued, "there was a misunderstanding at our wedding that led to some temporary difficulties in our relationship." A misunderstanding. He was still calling his family's deliberate cruelty a misunderstanding. "I've asked you all here today because I want to publicly declare my love for my wife and ask for her forgiveness in front of the people who know us both professionally." Oh no. Oh no, this was happening. Hunter was actually going to make a grand romantic gesture in front of our entire company. The second-hand embarrassment was so strong I could feel my face burning. "Sienna Parker Ellis," Hunter said, turning to face me directly. "You are the most intelligent, beautiful, and accomplished woman I've ever known. I was a fool to let my family's outdated attitudes hurt you, and I'm asking for your forgiveness in front of everyone who matters to us professionally." Several people in the audience were shifting uncomfortably. A few were holding up phones, obviously recording this train wreck in progress. I sat perfectly still, my expression carefully neutral, waiting to see how far he would take this. "I know that trust needs to be rebuilt," Hunter continued, his voice growing more emotional. "But I believe our love is stronger than any obstacle. I believe we can build something incredible together, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in business and life." There it was again, the business partnership angle. Even in his grand romantic gesture, Hunter couldn't help but hint at the financial opportunities my family represented. "Sienna," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "will you please give me another chance? Will you please come home?" The room was dead silent. 50-some professionals holding their breath, waiting to see how this corporate soap opera would end. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, could practically hear the office gossip already being composed in people's heads. I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt, and walked to the front of the room. Hunter's face was hopeful, expectant, confident that his public display had won me over. "Hunter," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "that was certainly something." His smile faltered slightly at my tone, but he was still optimistic. "I need to ask you a question," I continued, turning to address the room as much as him. "Do you love me for who I am? Or do you love me for what my family can do for your career?" Hunter's face went pale. "Sienna, of course I love you for who you are. The money doesn't matter." "Then you won't mind that I'm financially independent now," I interrupted. "You won't mind that I don't actually need this job or your family's approval or your business connections." The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. "In fact," I continued, "you'll be happy to know that I've started my own investment consulting firm. I already have 14 clients, including Morrison Holdings and Davidson Industries." I saw several people in the audience sit up straighter. Morrison Holdings and Davidson Industries were major players in the investment world, exactly the kind of clients Wesley and Cober competed for. 14 clients in 2 weeks, I repeated, letting that sink in. Not bad for someone who supposedly needed your recommendation to succeed professionally. Hunter's confident demeanor was cracking. "Sienna, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that your grand romantic gesture falls a bit flat when it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who I am and what I want," I said clearly. "I'm saying that a man who truly loved me wouldn't have stood by while his parents mocked my mother at our wedding." The audience was completely absorbed now. This was better than any reality TV show they'd ever seen. "And I'm saying," I concluded, "that Hunter Ellis, the man who spent 2 years telling me I'd never make it in this industry without his help, just publicly humiliated himself in front of his entire company." The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone in the back row started clapping. "I'm Sienna, 28, and the applause that started in the back row of that conference room spread like wildfire through the entire company. 50 investment professionals who'd watched Hunter Ellis treat subordinates like garbage for years were finally seeing him get his comeuppance, and they were loving every second of it. Hunter's face went from confident to confused to absolutely mortified in about 3 seconds. The clapping wasn't polite golf claps. These were enthusiastic, sustained applause from people who'd been waiting years to see someone put Hunter in his place. I could see faces in the audience lighting up with glee. phones being held higher to capture his reaction, and more than a few barely suppressed grins. "Thank you," I said to the room, and the applause gradually died down. But I'm not quite finished. Hunter looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. His grand romantic gesture had backfired spectacularly, and now he was trapped at the front of a room full of colleagues who were clearly enjoying his humiliation. "You see, Hunter," I continued, "you made a critical error in judgment. You assumed that I needed you, that I depended on your approval and your connections to succeed. You assumed that your family's money and status made them, and by extension, you, superior to people like my mother and me." I could see Wesley & Co.'s senior partners in the audience, their expressions ranging from fascination to concern about the public spectacle unfolding in their conference room. "But here's what you didn't know," I said, my voice growing stronger. "My mother, Linda Parker, the woman your family called a cleaning lady, is worth $1.2 billion. She's a self-made investor who built her fortune from nothing while you were coasting on Daddy's trust fund." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Several people were frantically typing on their phones, probably researching my mother's name and investment history. "And here's what else you didn't know," I continued. "I don't need this job, your recommendation, or your family's approval, because I already have more money than you'll probably ever earn in your entire career." Hunter's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The color had completely drained from his face, and I could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "So when you ask me to come home, to rebuild our marriage, to become your business partner," I said with devastating clarity, "you're not asking because you love me. You're asking because you've realized that divorcing me means losing access to more money than your family has ever seen." The room was electric with tension. This was no longer just office gossip. This was a complete demolition of one of Wesley & Co.'s most arrogant managers, performed with surgical precision in front of his peers. "Sienna," Hunter stammered, "that's not... The money doesn't matter to me." "Really?" I asked, tilting my head with mock innocence. "Then why did you and your parents spend my entire wedding reception talking about business opportunities once you learned about my mother's wealth? Why did your father call me 3 times this week asking about investment advice? Why did your mother suddenly invite my mom to join her charity board?" More murmurs from the audience. People were putting pieces together, realizing that the Ellis family's sudden change of heart about my family was entirely financial. "Let me make this very clear," I said, addressing Hunter but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I will never reconcile with you. I will never work with you professionally. And I will certainly never allow you or your family access to my mother's money or mine." Hunter's humiliation was complete, but I had one final blow to deliver. "In fact," I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out a business card, "I'd like to formally invite anyone in this room who's tired of working for someone who treats employees like garbage to contact me about opportunities at Parker Consulting." I placed a stack of business cards on the conference table. "We're growing quickly. We believe in treating people with respect regardless of their background, and we're always looking for talented analysts who want to work for a company that values competence over connections." The audacity of recruiting Wesley & Co.'s employees at a company meeting, in front of their management, while simultaneously destroying Hunter's reputation, was so boldly unprofessional that it somehow circled back to being brilliant. "This meeting is over," announced one of the senior partners, clearly realizing that damage control was necessary. "Everyone back to work." But nobody moved. They were all staring at the business cards, at Hunter's devastated expression, at me standing confidently at the front of the room like I owned the place. "Oh, and Hunter," I said as people finally began to file out, "next time you want to make a grand romantic gesture, maybe make sure you actually understand what romance means. Hint, it's not a business proposal in disguise." As I walked toward the exit, people were grabbing my business cards and several colleagues approached me directly. "Sienna," said Jennifer, one of the junior analysts, "are you really hiring?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. "Email me your resume." "What about me?" asked David from the research department. "I've been thinking about leaving anyway." By the time I reached the elevator, I'd collected contact information from 8 potential employees and handed out all of my business cards. Hunter's attempt to win me back had inadvertently become the best recruiting event I could have imagined. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of Hunter standing alone at the front of the empty conference room, looking like his world had just collapsed around him, which, to be fair, it probably had. I'm Sienna, 28, and 6 months later, I'm sitting in my corner office in downtown Portland, overlooking the Willamette River, running a consulting firm that's grown from 0 to 15 employees. 8 of them are former Wesley and Carver analysts who decided they'd rather work for someone who treats them like human beings. Hunter's public humiliation became the gift that kept on giving. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and the people you love. Parker Consulting specializes in investment analysis and financial strategy for mid-sized companies who can't afford the big firms but need more expertise than they can develop internally. It's exactly the kind of niche that larger companies like Wesley & Co. ignore, which has made us incredibly successful incredibly quickly. Mom was right about my trust fund providing the foundation I needed. Having financial security allowed me to take risks, hire good people, and build the kind of company culture I'd always wanted to work in. We have flexible schedules, respect for work-life balance, and a strict policy against tolerating workplace bullies or discrimination. Sienna, my assistant Sarah called through my open door. You have a call on line 2. It's someone named Victoria Ellis? I looked up from the market analysis I'd been reviewing, genuinely surprised. Hunter's mother hadn't contacted me directly since the wedding disaster, though I'd heard through various channels that the Ellis family was struggling financially. Richard's real estate ventures had taken some hits in the recent market downturn, and apparently Victoria's charity board positions weren't as prestigious when they couldn't make their usual large donations. Tell her I'm in meetings all day, I said, and for the rest of the week. Actually, Sarah said with a grin, she's called 4 times today. She says it's urgent and she needs to speak with you about a business opportunity. A business opportunity? Of course. The woman who'd called my mother a cleaning lady now wanted to pitch me business ideas. Put her through, I decided. This should be entertaining. Sienna, darling. Victoria's voice was syrupy sweet, exactly the tone she'd used when she learned about my mother's money. How wonderful to finally reach you. I've been following your business success in the papers. Absolutely magnificent what you've accomplished. Thank you, I said neutrally. What can I do for you, Victoria? Well, Richard and I have been discussing some investment opportunities, and we thought you might be interested in partnering with us. Your expertise combined with our market connections could be quite lucrative. Their market connections. The same connections that had apparently failed to prevent their recent financial difficulties. What kind of partnership did you have in mind? I asked, genuinely curious about her pitch. We're looking at some promising real estate developments in Southern California. Nothing too risky, just solid investments with good return potential. We thought perhaps you and your mother might want to join us as limited partners. Limited partners. Translation. They wanted us to put up the money while they managed it and took fees. That's an interesting offer, I said carefully. Can you send me the prospectus and financial projections? Of course. Of course. But Sienna, I want you to know that this is about more than business. We truly regret the misunderstanding at your wedding, and we'd love the chance to build a real relationship with you and Linda. A real relationship. 6 months too late and $1.2 billion too convenient. I'll review your materials and get back to you, I said politely. Wonderful. And Sienna, we really do hope you'll consider this carefully. Family should stick together after all. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and laughed. The audacity was almost impressive. The same people who'd spent my wedding reception mocking my mother now wanted to be business partners and were claiming we were family. My phone buzzed with a text from Hunter. Heard from my mom that she spoke with you today. Really hope you'll consider working with my family. We could be great together in business even if personal isn't possible. Even Hunter, 6 months after his spectacular public humiliation, was still angling for access to my mother's money. Some people never learn. I forwarded both Victoria's call summary and Hunter's text to my mother, who was currently in New York meeting with her own financial advisors about expanding her portfolio. She called back within an hour, laughing so hard she could barely speak. They want us to be limited partners in their real estate deals? She gasped between giggles. Sienna, I looked into Richard's company last month when I was considering acquisition targets. They're leveraged to the hilt and facing bankruptcy within 18 months. So that's a no on the family business partnership? That's a no on ever speaking to those people again, Mom said firmly. But you know what? This gives me an idea. What kind of idea? The kind that involves buying Richard's company when it goes under and turning it into a division of our portfolio. Poetic justice, don't you think? 6 months ago, I was planning a wedding to a man who saw me as a stepping stone to his own ambition. I was working for a company that treated me as expendable, dependent on approval from people who looked down on my background and my family. Today, I own a thriving business, employ 15 people who respect each other and their clients, and have the financial freedom to make choices based on my values rather than necessity. My mother and I have grown closer than ever, bonded by shared success and the knowledge that we built our lives on our own terms. And Hunter? Last I heard, he was still at Wesley & Co., still making cutting remarks to subordinates, still convinced that his problems stem from other people's failures to recognize his brilliance. Some people never change, but some people do. Some people learn that dignity isn't something you inherit or buy, it's something you demonstrate through how you treat others. Some people discover that real strength comes not from tearing others down, but from building them up. I learned that my mother's greatest gift wasn't her money. It was her example of how to be successful without losing your humanity. And I learned that the best revenge against people who try to make you feel small isn't proving you're bigger than them. It's proving that their opinion of you never mattered in the first place. That was the beginning of the best chapter of my life. And honestly, it just keeps getting better.